Thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of this discussion. I'm always happy to be here at the University of Minnesota, especially at the Humphrey Institute, to talk about emerging technologies, emerging issues, and all of the legislative, political, policy implications that go with them. Matter of fact, on the hybrid and electric vehicle technology question, we have convened, myself and Representative Frank Hornstein, as this was becoming the next big topic for discussion. The university was extremely accommodating and convening a big discussion to get us started on thinking about some policies that we might be putting in place to create a better environment and climate to start receiving that technology here in Minnesota. I didn't do any slides. I was telling you earlier that I've done one PowerPoint in my entire life, and that was for a conference that my dad was putting together years ago. And I was leading a workshop at his request. And so I'm just going to speak briefly because Professor Levinson and Professor Glancy both did a fantastic job of covering the waterfront on the very policy questions that we'll have to talk about and consider and perhaps pass or not at the legislative level. When we talk about, of course, creating the legal framework for an emerging technology, that means you have to pass legislation, which means you have to talk to a lot of legislators and you have to convince them to make a change. Sometimes, of course, you can talk to regulatory bodies like NHTSA and the like, but even that's a fairly involved political process of persuasion and engagement with people who might not know a whole lot about the subject, and we'll just have a lot of really basic questions. So that's really the theme of the comments that I want to make, and hopefully, blessedly, I'll be very brief, and we can get some questions from you. So the first issue, of course, that is going to be in the mind of legislators, and starting to form in a few legislators' minds, but to be very honest with you, I think most legislators, at least in Minnesota, with whom I'm familiar, have absolutely no idea that this is a technology that's under active discussion and active interest. As a matter of fact, the first time, I'm kind of brand new iPhone 6 Plus over there. I'm kind of not totally a Luddite, but I'm not like my younger brothers, but I'm not totally out of it. But it was actually a young man who was a Humphrey Policy Institute graduate student who also works for the Senate, who dropped into my office. I think he was writing a paper or maybe doing his capstone or something like that, and dropped in and said, so are you ready to pass a bill next year that allows autonomous vehicles to run around the streets and roads of Minnesota because the technology is here, Google's got a car, and it's safer than any other car. All other cars are less safe because most accidents are caused by driver failures. I said, whoa. And that's exactly what the response is going to be, at least for the foreseeable future from the state legislature. It's going to be that ability to persuade legislators that this is in fact a safe technology. And that's a pretty high bar because we have been promised a lot of things by technology that just simply haven't come true. And legislators are going to be very, very sensitive to taking a step like that and then seeing something happen that was unanticipated, namely accidents occurring and then being foisted with the burden of some level of responsibility for what happens in the aftermath, both in terms of the direct outcome, injury, death, people's welfare and well-being, and then of course all of the legal issues that ensue from those kinds of questions. And that gets, of course, to the liability, who's the driver, who's in charge, what happens in the case of technological failure, and then insurance companies and insurance issues, of course, are very complicated and difficult to sort out. I'm probably repeating most everything, but these are going to be big barriers and lengthy conversations to have with state legislators. There could be questions about, how will the technology work in those invariable, instant snap of the moment moral judgments that drivers have to make. Do I hit the little lady or do I hit the child in the stroller? And those kinds of things. How is that going to be sorted out through technology if I don't have direct responsibility for the operation of the vehicle. And then after you get some of those basic issues sorted out by legislators, then you can get on to all the fancy conversations around data and data privacy. I say fancy because that's, you know, kind of second, third tier after you sort out those first, but that is going to be a huge subject of conversation. And people need to pay very, very close attention to that whole subject. We talked a little bit about it on the driver, or the vehicle communication. But if these vehicles are being driven through a lot of technology, all of that data is going to be captured in some form or fashion, and you know the police are going to want that information because they're going to have a really, really good public safety rationale for gathering up all that data and holding it somewhere because it might improve public safety at some unspecified point in the future. That makes legislators really, really uncomfortable because that pushes into a huge conversation that we're having right now in Minnesota around civil liberties balanced against public safety interests. So that'll be a difficult political conversation. And then you get on to, then a lot of other ensuing, I think, will be really, really interesting, but also difficult to sort out policy questions that were already touched on by Professor Levinson and Professor Glancy. What is going to be the effect on vehicle behavior, on transportation choices, on land use, on access, mobility, opportunity for seniors, young people, low-income folks, for greater opportunity to get around. And you're talking about huge infrastructure decisions, the road width design, where roads go, how we design cities, how we design communities that function effectively so that they work for as many people as possible. Cost of ownership issues, already this issue of car sharing and how that functions with our regulatory and our commerce environment are becoming difficult questions that we're confronting. I think made even more interesting and more complicated by the introduction of this technology. I think what we'll do, of course, is we'll take a very, very close look at the experience of other states. So we'll be paying very close attention to California, Nevada, Michigan. What's the other states? Florida. And how those early policy experiments are working. I anticipate that we'll take small steps, try to take little pilot projects, maybe restricted areas, different modes, different forms. I think shipping is very intriguing. Those sorts of applications, I think, we'll want to see before we see driverless vehicles, automated vehicles. And then, of course, you have to pay very close attention to who the stakeholders are and who's going to be involved in those discussions. And those, of course, would be chiefly transportation agencies, departments of transportation, the transit agencies, traffic and transportation engineers. Consumers are going to play a much, much larger role in this than I think we actually consider at this point. And as is often the case, technology very, very quickly outpaces the ability for our regulatory and legal environment to keep up. I don't know if that's good or bad, but that's just a fact. Cell phones are a great example. We have a very, very complicated legal and regulatory terrain, and it's confused between federal jurisdiction and local jurisdiction. And it manifests itself in huge, huge fights that we have at the state level. And this whole question of federal role is one that I haven't even begun to consider yet. But that's something to think about as well. Congress may get in on the act at the behest of key stakeholders and try to require and force states to take particular actions. The various federal regulatory bodies like NHTSA and others may start taking some sort of regulatory action, trying to gain compliance in state legal and statutory regimens, and that gets quickly complicated. Sometimes it helps and sometimes it hurts. Sometimes states involved have been told what to do, especially on transportation subjects, because that's typically been the province and the domain jurisdiction of state officials. And so when Congress starts telling states how to act, look how long it took for us to pass .08 and mandatory seatbelt regulations in Minnesota. And that's just because we were feeling really bratty and we didn't want to comply with what our mommy and daddy was telling us to do at the federal level. Insurance companies are going to play a huge role. The public safety officials, police in particular, which was mentioned earlier, public safety experts, public safety advocates are going to play a big role in this conversation and discussion. And that police question is going to cut a couple of different ways. Don't just, police aren't like dentists who profess that they want cavities to go away. Police, in my experience, often want to continue to create a rationale for as many police to be hired on the police force as possible. When you're taking away their major book of business, they're probably going to react negatively. A great case in point in Minnesota is the resistance to red light cameras. The police have been blocking our ability to move forward on that in large measure. Some of the private safety concerns have been a part of that as well. But the police have been the major force that have stopped or taken adoption of red light enforcement cameras because they feel that that takes away a major economic interest of theirs. Manufacturers, and I think equity advocates are going to play a role because they're going to see great opportunity for greater mobility for special populations like seniors and children, low-income folks as well. And then the land use considerations are going to be really, really interesting to see because the opportunity to create these more dense, higher land value environments is going to be, I think, a subject of great interest to cities, to developers, to others who want to create that equity bonus from transportation policy. Road contractors and people who build infrastructure, again, they'll weigh in on different sides of this particular question. And then the freight industry and the shipping industry, I think, is going to have a real interest and real active role in the debate that we have. With that, I'm going to suspend and look forward to our conversation.